Good afternoon. My name is Val Innes. I'm the Head of Service for Next Generation Qualifications and Standards here at SQA, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to this, our final webinar of the series. Not necessarily for the year, but certainly for the academic year. We had a series of 6, and this is number 6 of 6. Today's topic is HN grading, the journey so far, and we have a jam-packed session for you today, full of really valuable and interesting insights from some of our key practitioners leading this pioneering work for SQA. I know there are a lot of familiar names on the call today that were also attended the webinar yesterday, our Pilot Centre Reflections session. Welcome back. I'm sure everybody that was present yesterday thoroughly enjoyed that session. I know that myself and my colleagues in SQA certainly got a lot out of it, and I'm sure you did too. You will notice that there is some synergy between the content of yesterday's session and today's. That is evident, and I hope you will find today's session every bit as valuable. We have a number of speakers for you today. Jane Henderson, the new Product Development Manager for NextGen Qualifications and Standards, one of our team here, will be introducing the concept of grading and some of the rationale, the history there. We are also joined by Gail English. Gail is the Qualification Manager responsible for HNC Television. We have Jim Thompson. Jim is the Subject Implementation Manager for Engineering, and Walter Patterson. Walter is the SIM for Computing. So each will be exploring a different grading model today. I was mentioning the synergy between the content of today's webinar and yesterday's, but we also realised that there is obviously a natural synergy between the subject of grading and articulation and progression. So we're also joined today by David McShane. David is the Research and Policy Manager responsible for all things articulation and progression for NextGen HN, and he is going to say a few words today as well. I reflected that it is quite a full session, it really is, and quite a lot of detail as well. We expect that we will take, if not the full 55 minutes, certainly very close to it. So we will answer questions in the chat. If there is space at the end for questions and answers, then happy to do that. But just giving a wee bit of warning that the session itself today is quite full. So with no further to do, I'm going to hand straight over to Jane so that we can crack on with the substance.
That's lovely. Thanks for the introduction, Val. I'm going to go reasonably quickly through a few slides, giving a bit of background and context to this. As many of you on the call will know, our current higher national qualifications have a single graded unit. And one of the distinctive features of our new NextGen qualifications is that we are moving to a model of whole qualification grading. And it's relevant to wonder why we're doing this. And the answer is that extensive research and engagement confirmed that we had opportunities to improve how we are capturing the learner's overall performance. We have opportunities to improve the learner's motivation across the whole course and all units. And we also have opportunities to improve consistency and understanding of standards, both for learners and for centres, and between subjects and across subjects and across centres. So some really good opportunities there to make for a better experience for the learner. At the start of developing qualifications as part of NextGen, development teams in session 20 to 21 were given freedom to devise new approaches for grading, but in line with our NextGen vision. And the three models that we're going to explore today are in essence variations on a theme. We have given them different names, but they have much in common, as I'm sure will be drawn out today in the presentations. All of them encompass a greater focus on course aims. All of them include meta skills as well as the technical knowledge and skills relevant to the sector, as you would expect. And although it's it's not something that anybody, even in NextGen, anticipated, the events of the past couple of years with COVID and the modifications that we have moved to as an awarding body and working in partnership with our centres to deal with that situation means that there actually has been an accelerated readiness for change on the part of our centres. Centres have been assessing more holistically against course aims. They have been making really good use of internal quality assurance panels in order to arrive at final grades for learners. So there has been some benefit in that for us. If we can move to the next slide, Helen, please. Very quickly then, and for convenience, although there is truth in why we have called them each one of these names, but for convenience, model 1 is our key competency model, which Gail will speak about. Model 2 is a holistic model, which Jim will talk about, and model 3 focuses on key components. And I have put a link there to an SQA Academy module on grading. It's been around for a wee while now. Anybody in the audience that's interested, you will get complimentary information in there to the presentations today. And if we can move on again, thank you, Helen. Another distinctive aspect of our new approach is that we are providing what we're calling grading narratives for each of the three outputs levels of achievement for candidates, around achieved, achieved with merit, and achieved with distinction. And we'll take a very quick look at those narratives on the next slide, please. There's a lot of text there, and I'm not going to read it all out, but what you will be able to discern, even scanning those quickly, is that all of them differentiate these levels of overall whole qualification performance. I think it's worth noting just how substantial an achievement and achieved is. From that description, the candidate demonstrates thorough knowledge and understanding, application of skills, they think and work independently, they use judgment, they achieve agreed aims, they apply a range of meta skills and working well with colleagues and peers. So worth just kind of hanging on to the substantial achievement that attaining an HNC represents for our learners. These detailed narratives are on multiple places on our website and in the Academy module that I've referenced, and I'll shortly pop a link in the chat to that documentation so that you can look at it at your leisure. But thank you for that time to do a brief introduction to the background, and I am delighted now to hand over to my colleague Gail English, who will talk about the key competencies model. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you everyone who is attending this afternoon and is interested in hearing about our grading models. I'm going to just give you a little bit of background about myself first of all. I, as a mature student back in the early 90s, I did an HND in television and corporate video production. It was the very first time that course had been run, and it was very different to other courses that I knew about in the past. Enjoyed that, and the grading model at that time was merit statements. So I gained many a merit along the way for different individual subject areas or different units. I then worked in industry in the television and corporate video sector, and then I became a lecturer. And when I started lecturing, it was still merit statements. So I gave out a few merits to my learners. But then in 2003, the graded unit was introduced. So I was involved with the qualification design team at the time in the development of the graded unit. And then consequently rolled it out as a lecturer, and taking on that kind of that new approach at that time was quite a lot of work for everyone, but it became the model, and we kind of embraced that. So I think, you know, that has given me quite a good understanding of the evolution and revolution of qualifications that we have within our HND frameworks. So in terms of the HNC in television, Jane talked about the research that's been done in coming up with the whole grading approach. But for television, we also did some additional research with employers and with HE in order to kind of find out what they would want in a new entrant or someone who was progressing onto their course. So we did extensive research back in August 2020, September 2020. And it was really interesting because the findings of that from employers, they said that actually grade wasn't important to them. They said that what was important was a range of technical knowledge, understanding the television industry, the work ethic, set etiquette, communication, and how they would assess that. They said they would do in an interview situation or the build up to the interview, which is the initial CV or the email that a prospective employee would send in order to get that interview. So that for them, it was how someone could articulate their understanding of television, their passion for television in that particular process. For HE, so the grading is important in terms of identifying the different levels that a learner has achieved in order to recruit. But things that were noted were thinking critically, critical writing, creative problem solving, academic writing, resilience, reliability, teamwork, communication, research skills. But it was a mixed bag in terms of what that approach would be within universities. They did say, some universities said that the interview was really important in terms of being able to articulate all of those things at the interview, but they also said that the reference that the lecturer would provide also is really important in terms of building a picture of that candidate. So all of that information fed into the model that we have produced for NextGen television. Next slide, please, Helen. So now go into a little bit of detail as to what our model is intended to do. So from the information that we gained, we thought it was really important to highlight a learner's strengths and specific competencies that were required in TV production, and those were the competencies that were identified during the research, and these are reflected in the grading model. We thought it was really important to give a more accurate picture of a learner's achievements in relation to the specific aims of the qualification, and as Jane mentioned, during the pandemic, that kind of model got tested by default. Obviously, as we went through the procedures to adapt to the situation. So it gave us a little bit of a soft launch in a way. But we were looking at the kind of relevant skills, knowledge and professional behaviours that were linked to the specific aims of the qualification. But another key point was about motivating the learner through the whole of the academic session. The graded unit, project-based as it was in television, was still very much end-loaded. So the learners would need to complete their units first and then approach the graded unit at the end. And it was always quite a big project. And initially when we started to deliver it, I think learners probably paid as much attention to the units, which were a pass or fail, as they did to the graded unit, because it was all quite new. But as the graded unit process became more familiar, I would say that lecturing staff and also learners understood a little bit more about how to approach it. And myself and my teaching team, we developed this screamer, which helped learners with the graded unit to plan the time. But as you can see, it's quite a scary clown and a screamer, which I think does embody the fact that it's actually quite an important but scary and stress-inducing thing, both for the learners and also for the I can just hear myself there, learners and also for the lecturers involved, and also very time consuming. And what that also meant was that the units themselves, learners would try and do what they needed to do to pass, but wouldn't perhaps put their best efforts in, and they would leave all that for the graded unit at the end. So the motivation was sporadic throughout the year, and actually sometimes that would affect attendance, and this is in my personal experience. But also we thought it was really important to differentiate the learners' levels of achievement. So employers have said, quite clearly that for them the grade isn't that important, but it is for entry to HE that the understanding of the grade and the learners' levels of achievement is important. So that was that's what we hoped the model would do. That was our plan. And Helen, if I could have the next slide, please. So in a bit more detail, the approach is that the projects are graded and not the individual units. So individual units, it will be a pass or a fail, but those units are combined into the project, so they're not standalone elements. It's kind of like Lego building blocks. So you get your Lego set for Christmas, you build it according to the instructions, and then you take it apart, and then you rebuild it using the same elements. So all these elements in there, but you're just building something using your imagination. The grading is across 3 competencies, so sector, academic and professional behaviours. And again, those were identified through the research with HE and with employers as being important to define. To support that, we have built a matrix which has statements within it against the distinction, merit and achieved levels. And it was there really to help standardise across teams. You'll see an example of that as we go forward. Also in the grading process, a really important element of it is the subject teams who work together in order to review the learner's profile and reach a collective judgment of the overall final grade, because there is one final grade that goes on the certificate at the end, but the performance is tracked across these 3 different competencies. And what the learner will have in their hand at the end of the year of HNC delivery is a final grade on their SQA certificate, and also a learner profile which is developed by the centre to track the progress of the learner throughout the year. Okay, next slide please, Helen. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but it's just to give you an idea of what the matrix or rubric looks like. I know that some of you who already work in the academic field will use these and be familiar with them. But we have down the first column, we have the aim, so communication, ethics, working with others, problem solving, initiative, all things which were identified through the research, and those are mapped to particular outcomes within the mandatory units of the qualification. So we can see that in communication it maps to television programme production outcomes 1 to 5. So it's all mapped down through the whole matrix where that can be, where that particular criteria can be found. And then we have distinction, merit, achieved and not achieved, and statements across those as well. And if we go to the next slide, we can delve a little bit into more detail of what that actually looks like, so you can read it now. So we're looking at professional behaviours and we're looking at ethics, which maps to TV programme production outcome 6 and TV technical production outcomes 4 and 5, both of which are the big mandatory units that are used to create the framework. So for distinction, they demonstrate an accurate and insightful understanding of ethical considerations required in television, and down to achieved, where they demonstrate an adequate understanding of ethical considerations required in television, and the merit there in between. So it is something which centres should find useful and make the whole process of marking a little bit easier. I think looking back at the graded unit, the marking is absolutely intense over a small period of time, and the assessment level is quite intense over a quite small period of time as well, whereas the marking for this grading model is spread out over the year. Okay, next slide please, Helen. And this is what is an example of what that grading process can look like. So we have down the side the projects. So for learners who are completing the HNC in television, throughout the 2 mandatory units, we've identified that they have to do a minimum of 3 projects in order to meet all evidence requirements and all knowledge and skills. But in theory, they can do more. So again, the complexity of the projects will differ depending on the centre and what their local area or what their specialism may be, or what kind of clients they work with, or outside organisations they work with, or whether they have work experience involved as well as part of their delivery. So there may be more projects, but a minimum of 3 is what is required for this qualification. And then we have sector specific, which is about their ability to carry out creative, technical or craft tasks. So that's very much about the television specialism. Then we have academic, which is pulled out in terms of research, analyse and critical thinking, or their ability to analyse and critically think. And then we have professional behaviours, which is their understanding of industry rules and etiquette. So the learners are marked across those 3 different competencies, and then it's aggregated at the end. But what will also feed into that, so it's not just a hard achieved and add it up and find out what they have most of. There's also input from the teaching team, delivery team, there's peer review, and there's also individual reflection as well, which feeds into the overall grade. but this is kind of a way of managing it throughout the year. And the expectation would be that in terms of the personal profile, there would be there could be statements from the matrix which could be included there, so the learner understands why they have achieved that particular level for that particular project. So that's me at the end of my slides. I feel I've talked it fairly quickly, so I'm going to pass over to Jim now, who's going to talk about the holistic model for engineering.
Thank you, Gil. Good afternoon, everyone. The first thing to say that the Television Award has been piloted for a year, so they'll have built up a knowledge of the ongoing situation. Now, engineering, the pilot starts in August. We have 3 centres running with the HNC Engineering Award, and we're in close contact with them and to discuss quite a lot of topics, and one of them is grading. But the first thing about the grading model, what we're calling the holistic model, in HNC engineering, there are 12 credits out of the 15 that are the major contributors to the course aims and the key competences that are required by the Engineering Council. Now, if you're not an engineer, the Engineering Council define key competences for the 3 levels of engineer. And these key competences fit in nicely with the NextGen philosophy, because the key competences uncover things like applying knowledge, specific engineering knowledge to a technology, but all engineers adhere to an ethical code of practice. And that fits in with the NextGen philosophy of sustainability. What the ethical code of practice is about is what we call cradle to the grave engineering. If you're manufacturing a car or a washing machine, you have to be mindful of the materials you're taking from the planet in the first place, the resources you're using, electricity, gas, whatever it is, to manufacture that product. And at the grave, you have to really think about when that product is at the end of its lifespan, what happens to that material? Can you recycle it? You can't just put it in the landfill. So there are 12 units that are core to engineering, 12 credits that contribute to the course aims and the key competences. And you'll see these units, if Helen can maybe move to the next slide. This is where we look at the 12 credits. Now, it's been defined that there are 6 credits common to all engineering disciplines. As you can imagine, engineering is very diverse, electrical, mechanical, whatever, but there are 6 credits that are common to all. The biggest one is what we call the professional practice in engineering, and that's the one that's closely aligned to the Engineering Council's key competences. We embark on that journey on the HNC, and these competences are picked up again in the HNC. Along with that, there are certain mathematical tools that all engineers need. Electrical engineers will need different tools from mechanical engineers, but they're all embraced in this unit. And there are certain basic principles that are common to all engineers. So that's 6 credits worth that are common to all engineering disciplines. Above that, we've got specific engineering disciplines called the mandatory optional units. They're all 3 credit in value, and they're industry specific, electrical, mechanical, etc. But it's worth noting at this point in time, when you look at units, we have to rethink how centres are going to deliver these units. And we're moving away from a situation whereby a lecturer will get a unit on a timetable and be given an SQA assessment exemplar, and that's your territory. We are now looking for more project-based assessment, bigger tasks, more in-depth analysis. So we have developed an educator's guide, and because we're looking for project-based tasks, and we're asking centres to integrate the work across units to provide a profile. In our educator's guide, we've given them about a few case studies. One of them's renewable energy. And from these case studies, we've given them possible project tasks. And the 3 pilot centres, we've discussed these case studies with them. And they're then mapping them to the units and the outcomes within units, and it's across units. So there's a big ask of centres straight away, you know. Now, how does grading fit into this? We're also providing them with a grading criteria matrix that we're asking them to apply to that as well. So as you can see, there's a lot more work required of centres. Hopefully, it'll make it more meaningful to the candidates, because we've done a calculation with the pilot centres. Instead of unit by unit, if you're running 2 semesters, we anticipate maybe 4 project tasks in semester 1, 3 or 4 project tasks in semester 2. Now, that lightens the assessment load for the candidates, makes it more joined up for the candidates. However, centres have to think about this kind of differently and work harder. So if we can maybe move on to the next slide, please, Helen. So how is this all going to work? Well, we've given, as I said, these project tasks built around a case study, and some centres, the 3 pilot centres, some have said, yeah, we'll run with the case studies provided. Other centres have said, no, we've got our own case studies built around our own industry, and that's fine. But the subject teams, as well as preparing cross unit assessment, they have to think about how they're going to make grading judgments. And we've come up with a detailed criteria matrix. There are 7 criteria, and some have subdivisions. And the key thing is here, we're not looking for any new evidence at all here. So if you're not looking for new evidence, you have to make candidates aware from day one. You know, this is the work you'll be doing this academic year, or you might just do it semester by semester. And by the way, here are the 3 grades available to you, and this is the standards we want to apply to it. So there's a lot of work in there for centres to get their head round. If we can maybe move on to the next slide, Helen. What are these criteria? Now, you know, a lot of them are quite obvious, and some of them require a bit of thought here. These projects, these tasks, there will be objectives set that the candidates have to run with. And so do they understand the tasks and projects they've been given? And their meta skills wrapped up in, can they work independently? How much help do they need from the delivery team? How much help do they need from their fellow candidates? Engineering Council are quite clear on applying and maintaining knowledge, and specifically to various technologies. I'll use renewable energy as one of them. We're also looking at grading the quality of submissions. You know, how good are their reports? Reflective practice, looking at the meta skills, and they have to keep tracking them. Being able to plan and manage their own work efficiently, and how are they at time management, because we all have candidates that are always late, you know, and you have to keep chasing them up for work. All that's going to impact on the grading. And some of these project tasks, they may well be working on their own, and others, they may be working in a team. And it's how they contribute to the team. So these are the 7 criteria that we're looking at just now. And, you know, it's worth noting that our centres have not gone through the pilot yet. And it may well be they're all equal weighting. It might well be they're not equal weighting. We will learn through as we go through the pilot. Some centres may say, well, we think this one should be weighted more than others. But at this point in time, I think we've got this criteria, this grading criteria that will put us on the journey. If we'll look at the next slide, please, Helen, that looks in a bit more detail at one of these. Quality of submissions, yeah, you know, obviously to achieve it, and Jane said earlier on, to get the HSC is an achievement. You know, they're having to get their head, they have to get their head around what are this task I'm getting asked to do, what are the objectives, do I fully understand them? So to meet that, to get the HSC to achieve, is well done to them. But you know, if they can go that bit further, a high standard, and we have, as I say, a detailed criteria matrix. We think it's detailed, but the pilot may change that. And finally, there's always the odd one or two you can say this is exemplary, you know, and this could be shown to anybody, and you know, this would stand the test of time as well. So we're going to the next slide, please, Helen. So the evidence sources, you know, it's key here that I reinforce these things about the subject teams, that there's a lot of work. We try to reduce the assessment loading for candidates. We're trying to make the course more joined up for candidates as opposed to outcome by outcome. They're thinking of bigger tasks that will encompass these outcomes in a natural engineering setting. You know, that's why different centres will align with the local industry, etc. So these teams have to meet regularly. And yes, the candidates will need to know, maybe not day one, maybe not week one, but they will need to know, what does this journey entail? You know, what have I got to do? What are these projects? What have I got to do to get a pass? And how can I be helped to be the best I can be? So it's a journey. It's not new evidence, but whenever they know the portfolio of evidence that's required of them, they will also need to know about the grading journey as well. And of course, with dialogue, candidates will want to know, you know, it's important that the staff feed back to the candidate, you are here on the journey, but if you do A, B, and C, you might be able to improve to a merit or whatever. You have that discussion, you help that candidate get the journey and help them make decisions for themselves. So it's a big ask of centres, and you know, and so we'll have to rethink about how this is done. But I think hopefully the candidates will benefit from all of this, and that's the holistic model. And I'll hand you over to Walter now.
Yeah, I'm here, don't worry. Good afternoon. I am the Subject Implementation Manager for Computing. I've been working with the Qualification Manager and the Qualification Development team to ensure that we have a good grading model for the HNC in computing, which will be run in the 2 pilot centres in the 2022-23 academic year. So like engineering, it's all ahead of us in terms of implementation. So I'm going to speak about the key component model. You'll see that there are 2 key components. I'll explain shortly that each of these has 2 subcomponents. The HNC Computing Award is achieved by achieving 7 mandatory SQA credits for the award. So that's the Common Core unit and a sector-specific unit. And then there are 8 additional SQA credits that are derived from a fairly extensive set of optional units in computing specialisms. So the key component grading model focuses on core aspects of computing knowledge, skills, and professional dispositions. So you'll recognize much of what you've already heard from the other 2 models in what I've just said. The first key component draws from evidence produced in the completion of the professional practice unit. Now that's the Common Core unit, 4 SQA credits for the HNC computing, and the student will undertake a significant computing project to solve a real world problem. The second key component includes a portfolio selected from the student's work in the sector-specific unit, which is called Digital Skills, and in the optional units they have undertaken. And I'll explain those in more detail shortly. So the next slide, please, Helen. So each of the key components will be allocated a grade. And in the next 2 slides, I'll show how they're allocated within each component. But the diagram shows how the 2 key component grades will be combined to produce an overall grade. And you'll notice that in order to obtain an overall grade of distinction, distinction should be obtained in each of the components. And this is in line with the characterization that Jane gave for distinction as requiring outstanding knowledge and performance. And we also note that if any one component fails to reach a level of at least merit in the grade, then the HNC will be awarded as being achieved. So we'll move on, Helen, to the next slide. So I stated a moment ago that the professional practice unit requires the student to solve a real-world problem. And they'll also demonstrate competence in team working, present their solution in the form of a project report. They will also evidence development in their meta skills and in their professional practice and behaviours. And included in that, of course, will be some reflection on their own performance in the conduct of the project and the team working. So the evidence for the professional practice unit requires both a product in the form of the project report and performance, which will be a presentation of the project outcomes and the meta skills self-assessment. So those are the two elements, the two subcomponents rather, that will come together to give us the final overall grade for component 1. Now, the grading of these subcomponents will be determined by the application of a set of rubrics. Other terminology has been used this afternoon, such as a grading matrix or a grading criteria matrix. But those rubrics will describe the characteristics of knowledge, skills and behaviours at merit and at distinction for each subcomponent. I'll move to the next slide, Helen, thanks. So key component 2, the first subcomponent, is a portfolio of student work across all the units of study, except of course for the professional practice unit, which is in key component 1. The intention is that this portfolio should be selected by the student to represent their best work over the course. This is in line with the aim of capturing the learner's overall performance. And of course, presenting their best work will also encourage students to be aiming at excellence across all of their work for the course, and thus maintaining their motivation across all units of the course. And research has shown that this approach of aiming for excellence at every stage of your course elevates performance levels overall. We also expect that lecturers will play their part in the construction of the portfolio by encouraging students to add particular pieces of work to their grade portfolio. This will encourage dialogic engagement between the lecturers and their students about their work and what makes for high quality performance and professional behaviours. And we know that that kind of dialogic engagement is a significant contributor to better learning and teaching. However, at the end of the day, the portfolio content remains the choice of the student. Thinking about the rubrics for the portfolio subcomponent, we also need to include consideration of the extent of the coverage of the units of the course, to encourage students to be as inclusive as possible when selecting their best work. For example, if a student only gave us examples of the computer programs they had written and nothing else, then that would not be graded highly, no matter how good their programming was. The second subcomponent recognises that knowledge is important. The knowledge of computing concepts and principles is fundamental to the study of computing. And so we will derive a grade of students' knowledge from the mandatory sector-specific unit called Digital Skills, a 3-credit unit, in which we do require knowledge evidence and which every student will provide. So these are the essentials of the key component model: 2 key components, each of them having 2 subcomponents, and a set of rules for combining the grades. Helen, if you could give me the next slide, please. So, as you've heard from the others, the rubrics for grading the subcomponents are actually crucial, first of all, to understanding the standards that are to be identified as merit or distinction. But also, these rubrics must be straightforward to apply and should clearly signpost to both lecturers and students what is expected of them. Now, it goes without saying that we will be reviewing these rubrics at the end of the pilot year in order to improve them. We'll look for feedback from the pilot centre lecturers and students. And as with any grading system, we expect that in each centre, the course lecturers will engage in professional discussion around their approach to applying the key component grading model, and also applying the rules for combining grades to derive the overall grade with a view to standardisation of judgments on grading. But additionally, during the pilot year, we will engage with our 2 centres to extend those professional discussions with a view to standardisation of the allocated grades across the pilot centres. And this could yield some useful exemplar portfolios that we can use for benchmarking purposes in later years. We also have intentions to continue to examine innovative approaches to the grading of the portfolio subcomponent. I think that's important, that we keep our minds open to different ways in which we might look at getting more effective approaches to making grading judgments. And one such approach might be to use adaptive comparative judgment. So that's my whistle-stop tour of the 3rd model. And we'll now hear from David about progression and articulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. Yes, people might wonder what am I doing here? This is about grading after all, but you can't really talk about grading without mentioning articulation and progression, and vice versa. They are inextricably linked. But what I'm going to do, rather than spend a lot of time on the topic itself, is just to give you assurance and give you some solace that we are engaging as much as we can with everyone who will engage with us. It was alluded to earlier, research and engagement is part of this whole project, and certainly in our strand that's no different. So it's really to give you a little snapshot as to where we're at, how that might impinge on the continuing conversations about grading and where we're going to go with that. Certainly, I think the information today, which I find incredibly interesting, has given me a lot of other ideas of how we can move on the articulation progression strand and what conversations we now need to have. So very key to that communication side of things, that engagement, is the articulation and progression working group. And I'm very pleased that there's some members of that on the call today, so welcome. It's a representative group that draws on experts and professionals who clearly identify who they're representing and why they're at the table. And I'll just sort of share with you some of the discussions we had at our second meeting a few weeks ago, where it was decided we would meet 4 times a year initially now rather than 2 to get more engaged with the issues. But there was a few things that were mentioned that needed more discussion and more clarity. One was timescales, the idea of getting information to HEIs in time for articulation purposes. Assessment, more detail was needed on this new holistic approach. One pilot centre offered to demonstrate to their university partners, and someone on the A&P group is offering to help us with that. The whole idea of learner promise and pathways, how can we ensure that colleges can say to the learners at the beginning of their journey, this is where you're going, you can get there this way, or this way. A lot of work to be done putting that in place. And of course, last and by no means least, and today especially, was grading and further explanation of the revised grading classification is required to avoid inappropriate mismatch between NextGen and non-NextGen. And hopefully, I think today has gone quite a way to starting that conversation and to clarifying some of the issues. So on a basic level, we had a general release announcing the arrival of NextGen, followed by a specific approach to HEIs and more recently a college and employer communication. Our feedback suggests that not all these messages have landed in the right place. And again, our partners and critical friends of the working group will assist us in compiling message appropriate mailing lists. So hopefully we can target our message to the right people at the right time now and not have such a scatter approach, which is well intentioned, but it's good if we can focus it. So we're conscious that written communication not always going to cut through or bring the message we want. So we've engaged with many representative groups and we'll continue to do so. And we're always open to any suggestions of who we should be involved with. There's been an SQA Quality Managers all-day event. That's college quality managers. We were involved in SCAP's articulation from a university's perspective. We've met with UCAS, we've met with the Admissions Policy Group, which is a high-level HE group, the Joint Articulation Group, which is a College of Scotland and University of Scotland group, and very soon be having much more in-depth conversations with College Scotland about the next phase of our communication. And a range of internal SQA committees and boards, when we're always asking for their feedback when we do engage with them. So the conversation continues, the communication continues. It's important to stress here that articulation from HN is not a new concept. So we're looking at these existing arrangements to see how we can tweak them in a sense, or how we can clarify, put in multiple articulation paths for the benefit of our learners. So it's an evolving process, constant evaluations, giving us new ways of doing things we haven't thought of, maybe putting forward the pilot centres frameworks. That's gone down quite well. And of course, a comprehensive series of topic-based webinars as well to communicate. But a further feature and sort of weapon in our armory is the website and the tile. So on the NextGen website now, we have an articulation progression tile, which covers all the things that we have been working on, suggested frequently asked questions, continually emphasizing our willingness to discuss and get engaged. It's also got links to the webinar that we did on articulation progression and the blog that came after that. So conversation's the key, and recent developments where colleges have facilitated discussions with their university partners in SQA signpost a really definite direction of travel for the coming months, so watch out for that. So it's important to note work to date has been a collaboration with our partners and stakeholders. So to recap then, we've established a cross-sector articulation progression working group. We have a coordinated approach to profiling articulation and progression. We've seen this approach introduce the concept of NextGen to HEIs and more recently to colleges and employers. And we are starting to put framework templates releasing to pilot centres and taking your feedback on that to see how we can evolve them and make them much more useful for progression and indeed for grading. So this is all about discussion, Please get in touch any time to discuss these little issues that have massive issues have disappeared since we've begun this. It seemed as if there were a million hurdles and things that could never get over. Most of them have actually just melted, and mostly due to discussions. So that last point I'm going to leave you with there, whole qualification versus graded unit. It's not like a match of the century by any means. It's basically that the whole qualification has beaten the graded unit. So no longer will all the effort be at the end of a qualification to see how you find your standing, but it will be the whole way along. And surely that's really going to help the learner a lot. Discussions we need to have is that the graded unit band doesn't equate to the whole HN grading. So it would be wrong at this point to look at achieve, merit and distinction as the grades in the graded unit. But that's a discussion for another day, I think, and I've taken up enough of your time. And thanks very much. And I will hand you back to Gail. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yes, so I am tasked with summing up with the reflections from the pilot centres over delivery over the past year. The 2 pilot centres began to deliver NextGen HNC television back in August 2021. Some of you may have been at the webinar yesterday where you would have heard directly from the lecturing team who expressed very clearly how the year has gone. But the feedback so far, to summarise, is that using the competencies model has given the learners an ability to continually improve no matter where their starting point is, and that bit has been quite a revelation for me. And initially, when we designed the qualification, designed the grading model, the thought in my head was that grading would begin on day one, almost, you know, they could, you know, across the different competencies. But in reality, that was not possible, because the learners wouldn't have the technical skills, wouldn't have the understanding of the production process. You know, they're just new. But what they could start to grade was the professional behaviours component, in order to instill good, you know, ethics, good teamwork, good a sense of being there, being present within their learning, which I think it definitely has motivated the students to you know, meet deadlines, hand things in on time, and to work, you know, to continually improve themselves, which is great. Learners also said that being able to make mistakes and learn from them at an early stage was really beneficial. And initially, the HND, HNC and television, the units generally started with theory, then practical, you know, component. Whereas now they can go straight into the practical component and contextualise straight away, make mistakes, and actually, because the meta skills is a key component of the qualification, that reflective practice is built in. So I heard from the students themselves who said this. They said that they made mistakes, reflected, they got better, and actually the products that they produced this year, and both centres have said this, the quality of that was so much better than previous years. So that, I think, is evidence in itself that being able to make mistakes, reflect, learn has been a really good thing. The assessment load has also been spread. If anybody was at this webinar yesterday, Dominic from Edinburgh College had the kebab, which was it showed the assessments throughout the year and how that was structured. And it initially in the current HN was a big at the end with a graded unit, but the kebab became much more pineapple-like, with like 4 chunks of pineapple with a couple of blueberries, to demonstrate the assessment load had been spread, and that for learners is a great benefit, and that they don't have that big stress at the end. But also for lecturers, it was a big benefit as well. And I think within the qualification, it feels like there has been space for deep learning, rather than for superficial get past the post type of learning. Also, the jumbo coined by Edinburgh 5 SQA credit units, they were designed to be integrated so as not to over assess, to work together, and that seems to have been beneficial and reduced assessment by 50%. One of the key components, I think, of this new model is the front loading. So we talked about end loading with the graded unit. Lecturers and teaching teams really do need to think about front loading and planning ahead in order to support this new grading model. So that was an observation from both centres, that forward planning was really important. So a big bit at the front, but then it evens itself out throughout the year. And another just key point is that, and it is stated on the slide, that these are prototypes, and they may change, and we are taking on board feedback as we go through in order to improve and refine. Okay, so thank you for your time, and I'll hand back to Val.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Gail. And we have a full